want to fend for myself, and I want to build people up for them to fend. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Free Like Me podcast. Guests come in here, they speak their truth, they leave their shame behind, they walk out of here free like me. If you would like to be on the show, reach out to me. You know, let's hear your life's journey and share it with others and free yourself. If you want to be part of my coaching program, same thing. Reach out. We'll set up a consultation call and get you started. And my book, Scarred, is due out July 29th. It's rapidly approaching. It's been a long time in the making. This book is going to help people heal and grow. And if you're dwindling hope in life, it's going to give you back hope. So go pre-order on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And this week, man, this is a powerful episode coming up. It's about privilege. It's about private schools. It's about building an empire. It's about murder. It's about destruction. And it's about loss. The gentleman here today, his name is Alan Mackerley. His father was also named Alan Mackerley. Alan Mackerley Sr, I should say, built an empire and saw it come crumbling down when he got embroiled in a murder trial against a rival businessman. In the midst of all that, his son had to deal with the shame and the tarnish against their family name, against trying to suddenly run multiple businesses while dealing with a murder trial for his father. And it caused a lot of self-destruction and pain in his life. And he's at a point now where he wants to tell the full story. His father was a great man, and he was also flawed in many ways. And Alan's going to share the good, the bad, the ugly. And he's going to free himself when he walks out of this studio. So let's meet Alan Mackerley. Alan, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you for having me, Clark.
This is a long time in the making. I'm familiar with this case from, living in Sussex County my whole life. You and I met through a mutual friend years ago, and, it was the 500-pound gorilla that was always in the room. Our friend would be like, hey, Alan Mackerley's going to come over to the party, make sure you don't say anything about his father's situation. And then he'd be like standing in a group of us, and then he'd point at me specifically, and he goes, especially you, because you got a big mouth. And I'd be like, whoa, bro, why you picking on me? And, so it was always there,
Yeah.
and so you and I have never talked about this. I got out of prison and I began healing, and you reached a point in your life in the last 2 years where, you've began healing, and you decided like, hey man, I'm ready to talk about this and free myself. And you're here today to free yourself, right?
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to start off, we're going to split up something you wrote, like a biography you wrote. And I read it, and it was really powerful, and it sets the tone for what we're going to go into. And I'm going to read the first half just, to make it interesting for the audience. So it's not just you rambling for, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it'll be me rambling with you. So
Sounds great.
So let's read. I'll read the first part, and then you go into the second part. I was supposed to run my father's company, drive his legacy forward, protect the image, keep the secrets buried, keep the pain under control, and hold everyone else together. I was the one people leaned on, but never asked about. The one who knew how to make things happen, but didn't know how to make peace within myself. My father built an empire, and then one day he became the villain in the story we never thought we'd be a part of. A murder trial, national headlines, 3 trials, 4 appeals, and a lifetime of whispers. He died in prison 2 years ago, and yet every day I still carry both the power of his legacy and the weight of everything he left behind. I've lived many lives. I've been the son of a king. I've been the broken man. I've been the addict, the fighter, the businessman, the father, the ghost in the room trying to smile through the sorrow. I've done the work. I've sat with shamans in plant medicine ceremonies. I've cried in therapy rooms. I've stood up in forums like the 6th Day and the Landmark Forum. I've paid tens of thousands of dollars to life coaches, hoping someone could help me make sense of the pain. I've enrolled in universities and classrooms searching for truth. And all the while, I battled waves of self-doubt. Moments where I didn't know if I'd make it. And yet, beneath it all, there's always been one thing, a never-ending love for humanity. It's about what happens when you stop running, turn around, and face the story you were born into, and finally decide to write a new one. This is for anyone who ever felt like they were too broken to lead, too lost to be found, or too ashamed to be seen. This is for the men who never learned how to feel, the women holding families together in silence, the sons trying to break cycles, and the fathers trying to be better than the ones before them. This is my story, but in some way I hope it becomes yours too. Because I believe our pain has purpose, and when we find the courage to speak it out loud, we become the medicine we were always searching for. Why don't you read the second part of this?
I was born into something that most people would envy. Power, wealth, a family name that opened doors. Private schools and lakeside homes. Employees who answered to my father like he was royalty. By the time I was old enough to understand what success looked like, I already had a front row seat to it. My father didn't just build a business, he built an empire. And in our world, that meant something. But what I didn't know was that legacies don't come with instructions. They come with shadows. From a young age, I was told what I would be, who I would become. Not in those words exactly, but in expectations. I was supposed to carry it all, the name, the image, the fire. I was supposed to be strong and controlled and capable. I was supposed to be him without ever being allowed to question him. What no one saw was the cost of being the chosen one. I wasn't raised to express fear. I was raised to override it. I wasn't allowed to break. I was expected to hold others up. And love? It existed, but it came dressed in discipline, power, and silence. I stepped into the business like I was fulfilling a prophecy. I brought ideas, energy, and passion, but I was stepping in a world already built in someone else's image. Employees didn't want to change. They wanted my father. They feared him, and maybe I did too. But I wanted his approval more than anything else, and I kept pushing, ignoring the whispers, the pressure, the cracks forming under my own feet. I didn't know it yet, but I was living a life that wasn't truly mine. I was carrying a legacy that was never designed to make room for me, only to protect what had already been built. And then came the unthinkable, the murder, the arrest, the trials, the silence, the death of a king. And there I was, standing in the ruins, trying to carry it all.
Being the namesake, being that close to him, being, his right-hand man, I'm sure people would whisper like, "Oh, he had to be involved. He had to know what was going on. They
did.
Yeah, and you've got to live with that, Yeah. and like I said, like my buddy having the parties, and you're coming over, he'd be like, "Nobody say anything about the murder," So that cloud is just like out there, and it's just like, and people are so fickle, like they always think they know what's going on, and like. As soon as there's any sort of trouble, especially when there's trouble of somebody up on the top of the mountain.
Yes.
Oh, they love to pull you down or rip you down,
Yes.
You said in that part of the biography, the cracks forming under my feet. Man, there had to be cracks. Just like every sidewalk you walked on, you had to feel like you were cracking it,
I did.
Oh, man, bro.
I did.
Yeah, that's a huge weight, that's a huge thing to carry. Like, and then just the whispers, you got to feel like, like I got out of prison, and one of my first stops was Kohl's. Like I left with zero on my back, and I just felt like walking through Kohl's the day I got released. I felt like people were like talking behind my back. That's Clark. That's him. That's the guy who murdered the guy. And
that's how I felt.
Yeah, and my niece is like, nobody's talking about you, bro. But I couldn't get that out of my head.
Yeah,
and that's how you felt.
I had the opposite. We moved to Sparta in 1974, and I was a large part of the Ski Hawks, and I was a large part of the community and a large part of the lake. And I used to go to Crow's all the time, a restaurant bar in the center of town. And I used to go to Arthur's all the time. And our company was just 8 miles up the road from Sparta. And so I felt a known guy in town. And maybe a little different than you. When I would walk into Crow's or I would walk into Arthur's and I would look and I would see familiar faces, I would see people whispering and they would kind of look over and then they would look away when they would catch me looking at them.
Yeah.
So it was happening.
That's the son of the guy who killed somebody.
I didn't want to go outside anymore.
Yeah. I hear you, man. I've recently revisited your father's murder trial.
Yeah.
And there's some things that are definitely hokey in that, inconsistencies, FBI. I don't want to say fabricating, but fabricating is what comes to mind.
Yeah.
Some stuff is just so far-fetched that they came up with. So we'll get into all that. So I want to paint the full story of your father's rise and his fall. And all the while you trying to steer a ship, with a broken rudder, basically.
Sure.
So why don't you take me into, your father, starting off as a young boy, a young man, getting started in business. Take me into, his life, and, it'll eventually lead into your life.
Okay. So the story, as I understand it, is my father grew up very, very poor in the town of Byram. And as a young guy, while his brothers and sisters might have been at parties, my understanding was my father was always at work. And his father, Tom Mackerley, was a very strict, very hardworking man that took care of not only his own family, but his mother and his father and his brother and his sister with my father's help. And so there was a period of time that my father, after work, would go work for a guy named Till Colombo, who owned the junkyard and owned many things and owned a couple school bus routes in Byram. And so I think my father was 18 or 19, and he turned to his father and said, Till approached me and asked me if I'd like to take over 2 of his bus runs. And his father wouldn't hear of it. His father wouldn't have it. What
type of work was the father in?
My father's father?
Yeah.
He was they built houses, construction.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And so, as I understand it, one day at the dinner table, my father brought the concept up, and my grandfather brought his hand down on the table. Glasses jumped up off the table. We build houses. We don't run buses. So my father, some way, somehow, had a conversation with Till on the side, and he started a part-time bus company after hours from his construction job with his father. And within a year or a year and a half, there was no more construction company, and my grandfather was the head of the bus company.
Oh, he even got him to join the bus company?
He did.
Wow.
He did. I think my father may have been 21. Byram Bus was incorporated in 1965. My father was born in 43, so I guess he was 22. And the story continues from there. Started with 1 bus, then it became 2 buses, and then it became a bus sales company, and then it became a bus manufacturing company, and then it became a finance company for other school bus contractors throughout the state, and then it became a finance company for over-the-road construction equipment and all the rest of it. All the while, my father and his father were working together in the company. It's funny. When people would come in and see my father and my grandfather was so young, they thought my grandfather owned it, and my father worked for my grandfather.
Right.
So that's how the bus company started.
It became, your father became so successful that, wasn't it the president of one of the banks even left the bank to go run the finance division of your father's?
He did.
So just tell me a little about that.
So my father got to a point where with the bus sales company, he needed to finance other school bus contractors in order to get our equipment sold. And so he went to the bank and he put a deal together with the president of the bank that they would work together, where my father would put the notes together and then he would sell the paper to the bank. And then it was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 years after that, Mid-Atlantic Bank was closing, and Ed Smith, the guy who was the president of the bank at the time, came over and started working with my father in something I think was called the Mortgage Plaza at Byram Bus.
Yeah, and for those who don't know our area, there was really back then two banks, Sussex County Bank
Yes.
and Mid-Atlantic.
That's right.
Mid-Atlantic was all over the place. So,
Yes.
I mean, it was a large bank.
Yes.
So this guy leaves that position to go work for your father.
He did.
So he's not going there, to move a couple pennies around.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's true.
Yeah. What were some of the, didn't your father have auto parts stores, and what were some of all the things he got involved in over the
So
years?
my understanding was I was in high school at the time, and my father had an accountant named Herb who used to work for Nisavaccia and Company, and my father would go to Herb to do the accounting for Byron Bus, and then he would go to do the accounting for Byron Bus Sales, and then he would go to do the accounting for Bus Bodybuilders, and then he would go do the accounting for the finance company, and he would pay individually for each one of those moves, and he realized, why don't I hire a full-time accountant that I have on staff at Byron Bus? So Herb Dillon left Nisavaccia and came to work for my father as well, and he had an office, and I guess my father made a deal with him where he said, keep your clients, but come work for me. So he became our company comptroller and our company CFO, and he came to work for my father at the bus company. And then I would have conversations with Herb. My father made so much money back in the day that he needed tax write-offs. At the time, there were investment tax credits. So he bought a 3-location auto parts Van Genrens in order to lessen his tax implications from the business of that year.
How many different businesses did he have at one time over the years?
Probably five in his 30s and then into his early 40s.
We're not talking, making a couple of dollars. Your father's wealth grew. You probably don't even know the exact number, but 40, 50 million in that range.
I didn't know the number at the time, but I did know that somehow I knew that Byron Bus was the largest income producing company in Sussex County for I don't know how many years running. And then I learned through the trials as a bunch of information came out. I knew my father did well, and I thought everybody's father did well. I didn't know any better. I thought whatever we had, everybody had. As I was in high school and as I was growing up. Interesting, when I was in high school and he had so much money, my parents used to say to us when we would ask him for something, what do you think, we have a money tree out back? What they didn't realize that I realized in hindsight is they did.
Right.
But they didn't give us to us anyway.
Right.
So, I mean, they took good care of us, but they didn't say yes to everything.
Was there private schools, and was there country clubs and all that?
So when you turn 13 on Lake Mohawk, you can have a boat license. So when my sister turned 13, they bought her a boat, an outboard motor and a boat. When I turned 13, they bought me a boat. When my sister turned 17, they bought her a car. When I turned 17, they bought me a car. And when my sister was leaving 7th grade, going into 8th grade, Blair Academy at the time had an 8th grade program to see if it would fit well with the postgraduates at Blair Academy. And she asked to go to Blair, and they said no at first. They had a run-in with the teacher at a parent-teacher conference at Sparta Junior High. And so that year they sent my sister to Blair, and then they wanted me to go to Blair the next year, only I was a year away. So they had me take tests to skip a grade. So I went from 6th to 8th, and I was a student at Blair at the time as well. And then my sister and I graduated from Blair.
Your father had to be smart. He had to be a shrewd businessman. The president of a multi-location bank is not going to leave his position as president to come work for just some fly-by-night hillbilly Sussex County school bus owner.
Right.
You know,
and the accountant of a very successful, the accounting firm that Herb worked with did all the school boards. So Ray Nisavaccia, a very, very successful guy, handled all the accounting for all the school boards in the counties surrounding us. And Herb left and came with my father.
Yeah, so these two guys aren't going to do that if your father's like not the real deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So he's
right.
And your father started off from humble beginnings.
Didn't have 2 pennies to rub together.
Yeah.
Yeah. My father approached the bank and said to the bank, as part of my bus sales company, I'm going to finance all these school bus contractors throughout the state of New Jersey who can't afford the equipment but who can't afford, who won't be able to pass their credit. So I'm going to personally sign for each one of them. I'm going to sell you the note, and I will personally guarantee the note. If they don't make the payments, we'll make the payments. And I'll bet you there were hundreds of school bus contractors in the state of New Jersey where my father sold the deal to Mid-Atlantic Bank that they financed those school bus contractors. My father provided them with the equipment, and then my father guaranteed their notes. And when payments weren't made by them, we had hundreds and hundreds of lease payments coming in a month on top of the bus company. On top
So
of the sales company.
let me just make sure I got this straight. So your father's building buses, or he's a bus salesman?
So as a school bus sales company, so it's like saying Ford or Chevy or Dodge, right? We had the Chevy dealership, if you will, but
Okay.
it was a Wayne dealership for a school bus body in the state of New Jersey. You couldn't buy a Wayne bus from anybody but Byron Bus.
Byron Bus.
In the state, not just the town.
There's just a couple, like Bluebird.
There
Is
were
that
5,
what-
and now there's 3. Now there's Bluebird, Thomas, and International.
Thomas, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you basically have a dealership of a school bus.
That's exactly right. We
Okay.
had a school bus dealership, and the single rear wheel, what people refer to as the short bus, wasn't available through the manufacturer, so you had to have that built from somebody else. And there was a company called VanCon who used to manufacture those buses for us, and there were times we were unhappy with their product, so he took some of the bays in the bus garage and started a bus manufacturing company where we bought 250 cargo vans a year from Air Chevrolet, brought them into our shop, cut them in half, turned them into the short bus, yellow school bus, and that became part of Byron Bus Sales.
Okay. So someone who credit isn't the greatest gets a bus from your father, and then he's taking that note and going to the bank, and he's making a percentage off of it. How's he making money with that note?
Okay. So it's interesting. I don't know where he came from. I don't know where he got the knowledge that he had. I don't know how he became as business savvy as he did. But he went to Mid-Atlantic Bank at some point, as I understand the story, and basically said, what do you get your money for? And let's say that they got their money for 2%. My father, back at this time, interest rates were double digits. Interest rates were 10 or 11 or something like that. So my father would put together a bus sales deal with a school bus contractor who needed 5 or 10 or 15 or 2 or however many buses. And he would write up the note and sell the deal to the contractor, and maybe he would sell it to him for 14%, or maybe he would sell it to him for 12%. You know, he'd put that interest rate with Herb Dillon on the note. He would then carry the note to Mid-Atlantic, and let's say Mid-Atlantic and Ed Smith and my father and he had a deal where Ed said, we get our money at 2%. My father said, well, between 2% and 12%, there's 10% in between. You keep 5, I take 5. And I will personally guarantee all of the deals, and I'll make the payments. If the other school bus companies don't make their payments, I'll then repossess the buses if I need to, resell them, and we move on. And he did thousands of deals like that, all successful.
Wow.
I don't know where he got the minds. I don't know where he came from.
Yeah. Like just
There was so much for me to learn from my father,
right.
and I followed him around with the largest eyes.
Back in the day, I had a tire retread shop, and your father was the. I did, I don't know, 10, 12 school bus companies, their tires in the county. Your father's company, I could never sell to, and me back in the day, I'm like, oh, the mechanic guy, he must be getting paid off by the tire company. But it was that your father was loyal to people.
He had a tough shop foreman who also had the autonomy of running the shop.
Yeah.
So he had a shop foreman at the time who called the shots.
Yeah.
Anybody who ever sat down with my father and tried to make a deal like that, had you made your way to my father, you'd have sold tires to my father. There's a funny story about the first school bus sales guy that joined my father. My father it was like 1974, so maybe my father was 31. And this guy named Jim Anderson, who was working for a tire company, came in and said, hey, Alan, we're trying to sell some steer tires and some drive tires to some school bus contractors, and he was expecting my father to buy 8 or 10 tires at a time. And my father turned to Jim Anderson and said, how much is a trailer load? And he said, Alan, I just want you to, every time I'm in town and I have the box truck here, I'd like you to take a couple tires, and I'd like to be your tire salesman. He says, well, how many tires come in an 18-wheel tractor trailer load? And anyway, so my father bought 18-wheel tractor trailer tire loads at a time. Jimmy Anderson was so impressed that he left the tire company and came to work as Byron Bus Sales' first bus salesman. and stayed with us through the years. And he tells that story. He tells the story that he came, and when my father asked him how many tires come in a trailer, he went back and he asked my father if he could have a job, and he went back and told the tire sales guy that he handed it on to the next salesman, and he told the owner of the tire company that he wanted to work for Byron Bus.
So another guy leaving a good position to come work for your father.
Yes.
Yeah.
So had you made your way to my father, you guys would have sold
I
tires.
never got to see Oz.
Right.
Oz was behind a curtain. I couldn't get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you guys were like the big dog company in the county, and I always tried to get in there. I just couldn't.
My father used to get calls from school boards to take over contracts of other school bus contractors because they weren't performing properly. So
and would he?
He wouldn't.
No.
Because
it was like an unspoken thing amongst the companies. You don't go into each other's territory, right?
Yeah, and the school bus bidding process doesn't like to hear that. But I think it exists everywhere in the world that people leave people with their customers. And if you and I are both sales guys at a car dealership, and I've been selling to a family and all their family members for 5 years, if I'm not in that day and you come in and one of those family members walk in, you don't grab that family member and pull them over to your side of the desk necessarily. That's my customer.
Back in the day, I remember there was an article, like saying, a route or a school district, is what I mean to say, would only get one bid for the busing contract. Like it wasn't like 5 school bus companies bidding on that route. And one of the problems is if you need 30 buses to do that route efficiently, and you already have 30 buses, but for another route,
yes,
how do you then do that route?
How do you put together 30 more buses and 30 more drivers with CDL licenses?
Right. Like drivers is the big problem in the school bus industry, right?
It's always been that.
Yeah, so it's not just like there's a mini monopoly for each route. It's that logistically it doesn't make sense either.
Yeah, and to go back to your point about one guy would show up at the bid, back in the day, all contractors would show up at the bids. Somewhere along the line, so the way school bus contractors contracts started back then was, let's say you had $1 million contract, just to use a round number, and you were able to bid that contract up over time, up to 30% before it had to go back out to bid. So long as you owned it, the next year you could take a 10% increase. Now you have $1.1 million, and then the next year you could take a 10% increase, and then the next year, or you could take 5% increases, or you could take 30% increase. But once it went over $1.3 million, the initial contract went over $1.3 million, it had to go back out to bid. Somewhere along the line, the school boards came up with, if a school bus contractor who owns the contract is willing to renew the route at CPI, cost of living index, they can renew it without it going out to bid. So many times contractors would have Opakong's routes dovetailed with Byram's routes time-wise, dovetailed with Sparta's routes, dovetailed. So for those routes to come apart regularly because somebody else, we had Sparta this year, somebody had Sparta next year, we had Sparta the next year, somebody else had Sparta the next year. It just wasn't efficient, and the school boards couldn't appreciate the efficiency of that. So it made sense for everybody involved. Forget the whole bidding process. It made sense once the low bidder won the contract, and let's say that was Byron Bus, if they would accept CPI, which sometimes is 1%, sometimes 0.5%, sometimes it's 3%, they could renew the contract forevermore until they were no longer doing the job that they said they would do on the contract. Then the school board had the right to pull it. So it wasn't even so much that contractors were staying out of each other's way necessarily.
So it's not like, all right, you're going to be the only bidder on this on this route. No. You can make it $5 million. That's right. You can't just go to some astronomical level, right?
That's right.
Yeah, because that was always, people were like, oh, it's fixed. It's all rigged.
Yeah, it wasn't fixed. There probably was a loyalty amongst the owners of the heads of the school bus contracting companies, but it wasn't fixed. If there ever was collusion, and there was time that there was collusion uncovered further east from us in the school bus industry, it's jail time. So there was no monopoly, and there was no, And there's also geography, where your school bus is designed by way of mileage and gas and driver and time. And so it wouldn't make sense for us to pick up a route and do it in Denville, let's say. So Hopatcong and Byram and Lenape Valley stayed right within our hub. Let's say Frank Black might stay Franklin and Newton and, Andover and maybe not Franklin, and then let's say Dennis Hamill would stay Sparta and, people like that. So it also made sense geographically for contractors to stay in their
Right.
5-mile radius hub.
Back in the day when I had a tire business, I became part of the school bus association. Like all the school bus companies were part of an association.
School Bus Contractors Association.
Yeah. And, I think, there was monthly dinners and, I'd get to stand up and make a pitch on tires, if we had specials going on, whatever it may be. And, get out and have a few drinks and something to eat and, whatever, just smooze with all the school bus companies,
Sure.
And I recall, one of the dinners I was at where you and your father came in, and your father was livid at one of the other school bus contractors, Frank Black, because I guess he had bid on, your company's contracts.
So what was going on at that time was that there were contractors at that time that were starting to sell out to the national big guys.
Yeah, like First Student's one of them.
Was one of them, right? And Laidlaw.
Laidlaw,
right?
Yep.
There were different large publicly held companies that when a contractor was ready to sell and get out of the business, they would sell to one of these large companies trying to make their way into New Jersey or wherever they were. So at that time, Frank Black had a sale waiting to be inked with, I think it was Laidlaw, which First Student then purchased. And the sale was probably a couple months away. Frank Black started to go to all of the other school boards that we were doing business with, and I can't speak about whether he was also stepping into other school bus contractors' territories. And he had approached Hopatcong, we were told, by superintendents, and he had approached Byram, and he had approached Lenape Valley, and he had approached Mount Arlington, which is where and basically said to them some version of, if you'll put your routes out, I can do them for half price.
50% off.
Right. So let's say Frank had a company that he was, and what you get for a school bus, for the sale of a school bus company is 1 year's contracts, cost of your equipment. And then if they buy your property, your real estate. So if you have $1 million worth of contracts and you have $500,000 worth of equipment, your company's worth $1.5 million.
So when he's going to sell,
yep.
So his purpose for doing that, going to your routes, was to pad the numbers, because it goes by the price for valuing the business is the amount of route contracts you have,
yes,
then the amount of equipment,
and then real
what's
estate
left
if they
on
buy
it,
your
and
property.
then if they buy your property.
That's it.
So has a deal. He's got a company interested in. He wants to get out.
They're a moment away from signing the deal.
So he's trying to load up some more contracts.
Correct.
To increase the amount.
Sale price.
For the sale price.
Yes.
Okay. Now, earlier you mentioned that your father had
received phone calls.
Yeah, about taking other routes over from companies.
Yeah.
That weren't handling the routes right, and he wouldn't do it. So explain who some of those routes were.
So I used to sit across the desk from him every afternoon in the afternoon and catch up and reflect on the day. And a couple times I was sitting there and I heard the phone ring, and my father would pick up the phone, and I'd sit across the desk from him and I would hear him say, "We would love to, but we don't have the drivers." And then he would hang up the phone. And I said, "Who was that?" And he said, "Andover, let's say." I believe it was Andover. And I said, "What did they ask you?" "That you would love to, but we don't have the drivers." Knowing that back in the day, drivers weren't an issue. We had plenty of drivers. And he said, "That was Andover. They're unhappy with Frank Black doing their routes. They'd like me to take over their routes." So me being a younger, maybe arrogant kid, right, said, "Dad, we have the drivers. We clearly have the equipment left over every year from our sales company." And I was in my 20s, and I was like, why are we not picking that up too? Why are we not growing? Why are we not? In essence, my father said to me, son, let me teach you something. Everybody has to eat. My father said a lot of things to me over the years that I still run through my head today when I'm in any situation that I'm looking for some clarity. And he said, everybody needs to eat, and everybody eats the way that they eat, and everybody affords their lifestyle the way they afford their lifestyle. And we have our routes here, and we do fine, and we're okay. And Frank Black and his family, maybe his father before him, set up routes over there. And Dennis Hamill has his routes over here, and Denise Stalker has her routes over there. And he said, so we stay in our lane. Whatever, I don't know if he used lane, but we stay where we live. I said, okay. So I thought about that for a moment, and I loved it because I knew my father to be a very aggressive, go get it, grow kind of guy, but very, very, very chill. Very, very chill. Very easy. Like, he made everything look easy, never raised his voice. We had a bus driver that drove for him for 40 years. Her name was June. And June says, I worked for your dad for 40 years, and I never once heard him raise his voice. I never once saw him upset when buses hit each other out on a snowy day or whatever. So he's very chill and very calm. But he was an aggressive business guy. So then I was sitting in the office another day, and I heard a call come in, and I heard them say, I heard my father respond, we'd love to, we don't have the equipment. I'm like, Dad, we have a couple hundred pieces of equipment left over from last year. We have 50 pieces of equipment. Why was that Andover again? And I think it might have been Newton, or I don't know who it was. It might have been the same school. I'm not sure. And I said, same story. They eat where they eat, and we live where we eat. Why are we not picking that up? Because as a young guy, I wanted everything we could touch, right? Let's go, right? And so I pulled out of college after I had started college to join forces with my father in the business, and we were supposed to become partners. He was going to. I asked him if I could replace college, and then I went back at night and did what I did. But I asked him if I could replace college with on-the-job training, right, on-the-job learning. So to me, in my young head, I was my dad's partner, and we were going to grow, and we were going to do all these things. And so I would keep pushing him, and I'd say, why don't we go after that? And he said, son, that's Frank's territory. We leave that alone. Fast forward, right, to the point that we were making before. Let's say Frank has his company. And would you like me to speak numbers?
Yeah.
Okay. I think back in the day, Frank may have had his total route gross income $2 million. And maybe $1.5 million, and maybe he had 500. I remember the number being $2 million, and maybe he had $500,000 worth of 30 buses at whatever, right? So $21,000 or $4,000 a piece. So he had the deal going together for, I remember the number $2 million. He went to Opacong, where I think we had $1 million contract, and basically said, I can do it for you for 500. Quote me, but he went to each one of he went to Byram and Lenape and what have you, where we might have had $1 million combined if you had to do it for 500, right? So the attempt was to make the 2 million 3, or make the 2 million 2.5, or make the 2 million 4, or whatever he could on his way out the door. And it didn't necessarily, I'll say, matter to him whether he could perform it or not, because he was
gone,
putting it there, and he was gone, right? So that did upset my father.
So your father is loyal to him
in a way that he doesn't even know.
Right. And not wanting, right. Frank doesn't even know that your father is receiving these phone calls to
I'm an arrogant kid saying to my dad,
let's do it.
Dad, we can absorb him in a rounding error. Why are, like, I'm this arrogant guy, like what are we doing? Why aren't we scooping that up and there's no more Frank Black? I didn't know Frank Black. I had no axe to grind with Frank Black.
Now, didn't Frank even start off his career as a bus driver for you guys?
It wasn't for us.
Oh.
My understanding is that when my father, I think Frank might have been 5, 6, or 7 years older than my dad. 5 or 6, older. Something like 7 years. And as I said, my dad got involved in the bus business very, very young, right? So the rumor in the story is, and I don't think it's a rumor, was that Frank Black was my father's bus driver on Frank L. Black, because my father went to high school in Newton, and Frank's dad, I think, and then Frank had the Newton contracts. So Frank was the bus driver while my dad was, interesting story as well. Frank wound up marrying a lady named Lucy, who double dated with my mom and dad, and my dad introduced Frank to Lucy.
Oh, yeah.
Is the story that I understand. So there was a period of time when there was a friendship there.
Right. Did it ever come up in conversation about your father buying him or buying any of the other school bus? Like if word got out that Frank wants to sell and
Yes.
you guys are nearby, did
Yes.
you ever think about making an offer?
I don't have a clear memory of that. I can recall that there were times that there were other school bus contractors that were considering selling. There was a van company that ran caravans and small vans called Cassidy, and I remember sitting with Cassidy as my father was trying to help me out and get started maybe in my own company or something like that. So I went and I sat with them. There was a time that there were some companies that my father had financed all of their equipment that they couldn't make the payments. Down further east, that my father would go and run the company while they were on their way out and keep things alive. And then I would go down and sit next to him. And it was like, son, maybe you want to grab these 10 buses, or maybe you want to grab these 10 buses, or maybe like that. I don't know if it's that there's as it pertains to Frank Black, like a lack of memory or whatever, but it would make sense to me that if Frank Black's company was for sale, that would have been something my father would have considered.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it was for sale on the street. I think that by the time you became knowledgeable that the company was for sale,
There was
already a deal in place with, I think it was Laidlaw, which today you would say the first student.
Right. I think that's an interesting component for where the story's going to go. That
It's a very interesting.
Yeah, your father was loyal and
Yes.
wouldn't take over
Yes.
Frank's contracts.
Yes.
When school districts are saying he's not doing it up to our qualifications, take it over, please. And your father's, I can't do that.
There were a bunch of school bus contractors throughout the entire state of New Jersey, all the way down to Trenton, that wouldn't be in business today. And they would tell you that if it weren't for Alan Sr., if it weren't for his equipment, if it weren't for his financing, if it weren't for bus bodybuilders. So throughout the entire state, there was a period of time that he was known as the guy that if you needed it, he had it. And if you couldn't put it together, he put it together for you, including Bill Anderson, which we'll get to hopefully in the future of this conversation, that he put in business and that they had a bus career because of him. And I don't mean to say that Frank or Frank's family had a bus career because of my father, but that would have been a company that he would have helped along as well with equipment or with financing or the need for routes or anything that they needed from the bus expertise place.
Yeah.
He was very, very good at what he did.
And so this goes back to that dinner I'm at, and your father came in livid at Frank. And Frank doesn't even know that your father refused to take over his accounts.
I don't believe so.
When asked. Yeah. And then he finds out that Frank's going and trying to underbid your accounts by 50% just to pad his numbers on the way out. And your father came in to that dinner with some choice words for Frank in front of all of us.
He did.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
He did. If you take it back, my father didn't go to high school parties. My father didn't. He was the guy that worked alongside of his father all throughout high school. He used to tell stories about how he'd bring buckets of water up to his father's parents' house, his grandparents, and you name it, he worked. And he wasn't a guy that started anything anywhere. He was a guy that just silently went and did what he did, my father.
Didn't you say, as a grade school kid, he was mocked and bullied a lot, and that was a driving force in him? So
to run forward before we come backward, when I came out of college, I asked to put myself in therapy. So when I went to a therapist, I went to see a guy named Larry Spiegel. And then my mother followed, and then my father followed, and then my sister followed. Well, I'd be sitting with Larry Spiegel, and he was explaining to me about my father. And he said, well, you know your father. And I said, tell me about my father. I think I was 19 or 20. And he said there was a period of time, I think it was the fourth grade, that my father was a guy that was skipped ahead from, I think, first to fourth, or first to third. There was something that he did, and my father used to tell stories about how he used to do his older brother's homework, and he used to do other kids' homework. And if there was a car in a field when they were in their teens, he was the one that knew how to hotwire it. And he was just the sharp, smart guy in the group. And I guess there was a period of time where there was something happening in class, and because of their economic position in the world and their inability, my grandparents didn't have much money. I guess he was mocked and he was made fun of in the classroom. And Larry Spiegel, the therapist, told me that something switched in his mind at that time, that he'll never feel this way again, that he'll never be made to feel this way, and he'll never be bullied, and he'll never be the guy from the wrong side of the tracks or the lesser side of the tracks ever again. So he made a decision at a young age that he wanted to be, I'll say, a millionaire. He has a friend that is very close with he and my mother, Joe and Judy. And Joe tells a story how when my father used to lay underneath one of the school buses at 20, fixing it, 22, fixing the bus, that Joe used to lay under it with him. And my father said, Joe, I'm going to be a millionaire. Why don't you go with me? And he said, Alan, it's just not in my thing, but I'm happy to lay here and fix the bus with you. So at a very young age, he had a burning desire to be financially free. And how he wound up with the bus sales company, the guy who had the Wayne contract for the dealership of Wayne buses in the state of New Jersey, my father would be down at the yard on a Saturday or Sunday. Another school bus contractor would show up to look at some buses that they needed, and the sales, the people that owned Wayne distributorship weren't there. So my father would get in the bus, give him the keys, and make the deal for the Wayne for whatever Wayne sale, Joe sales, bus sales, and so Wayne took it away from him and gave it to Byron Bus and my father.
As time moved on, he expanded. He bought a nightclub, opened a nightclub in Florida, bought a mansion on the water, had an airplane, had a place in the Bahamas. Tell me all, about some of that.
So in '83, Byron Bus burned to the ground. There was a fire. I was a junior in high school. And so I get the call that Byron Bus burned down. And it was I think it was in April of '83, and we got out of school in May. So I came home, and I was on the construction crew. And we worked my entire junior summer. We worked 5 o'clock in the morning till sometimes midnight. And we poured the concrete, and we laid the block, and we stood up the studs, and we put the trusses and the rafters and the shingles and you name it, sheetrock and paneling and what have you. Somewhere in my towards the end of my senior school year, my mom and dad separated. They had gotten into it in the house, and he walked out, and he went and stayed above his bus garage. And then he stayed in a hotel, and he bought a piece of property on Lake Opakong, and we built him, I think it was a 7,500 or something like that square foot home on Lake Opakong, somewhere starting around 85, 86. He then, somewhere, I want to say around 90, a guy named Vinny Trapasso, who used to own the lighthouse on Lake Opakong, his father did, and my father had financed a lot of the builders around our area as well. Homes by Frederick. Yep. My father financed Trapasso's. I think my father may or may not have done a deal with Dautel. I'm not sure. Don't quote me with some of those things, but I know he helped a lot of the builders in the area. Vinny Trapasso approached my father and said he wants to build a music mall. And my father said, what do you mean by music mall? And he said, I want anybody that goes out at night. If the wife wants to hear country music, it's on floor 2. And if they want to hear rock and roll, it's on floor 3. And if they want to hear Atlantic City lounge music, it's on floor 1. So if anybody shows up, they can just walk amongst the floors. So he and my father went down to Florida in West Palm and purchased an old Southeast Coast bank concrete building that was 3 stories, and put a club together named Tunes. Somewhere in that period of time, there was a guy named Bill Anderson who was at one point a superintendent in the Mount Arlington School Board, the contract that Frank, that became friendly with my father, and he was an airline pilot. Bill Anderson approached my dad at one point and said to my dad, how do I get into the bus business? And my father said, I give you a bunch of vans. I show you how to bid on the contracts. I set you up and I put you in place and you're in the bus business. So some version of that happened. And as a matter of fact, they moved into the house that I moved out of when we left Byron and went to Sparta. And then Bill wanted to sell after a couple of years. So my father found him the sale, and Bill wound up buying a house down in Florida and a motor yacht. So my father started traveling back and forth to Florida, and then he bought a boat and he put it at Bill's dock. So that's where the boat came from. There was another deal going on with 2 guys out of Pennsylvania that were related to Vinny Trapasso called Y-Rent, the letter Y and R-E-N-T. And they had put a Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac deal together where they were getting people who couldn't get financed through loopholes in the credit, again, process, and they needed funding. So they came to my father, and he financed and he funded that. That deal didn't go well. They took the money and ran, if you will, kind of. And they had an airplane in the mix, and part of the lawsuit against them, we wound up with the airplane. So he had so then he went down to Florida and he bought his own home on the water where the alleged murder took place, according to Bill Anderson, and put his boat, there. So he had a home in New Jersey on the water, a home in Florida on the water, a motor yacht, an airplane, and the nightclub that you referred to.
And then what about Bahamas?
So he had a boat slip for the winter at Port Lucaya in Freeport, Bahama, where he would keep the boat with a boat captain all winter long.
And so that's where sleep on the boat?
And live on the boat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that's where he was when this stuff went down with Frank Black and all the rest of it. So he came back to pay attention to what Frank was trying to undo of all the contracts that he started at 22 and ran forward. And now my father's semi-retired, if not retired, and Frank's looking to take away all of Byram's to bolster his sale. And my father, the air quotes were that he came out of retirement and came home to pay attention to what was going on.
We needed to set up the background of your father's relationship with Frank Black. Your father, was a loyal dude, wouldn't take over his contracts when he's being called to. Mm-hmm. Frank, on his way out, has a deal with Laidlaw and trying to pad his numbers even higher.
Yes.
Tries to underbid by 50% your father's contracts. Your father felt betrayed, lashing out at him at that dinner we were at. Bill Anderson was a guy your father got started in business, had the buses for him, showed him how to bid the contract, how to get started. Your father took over this plane in a failed deal. He got the plane out of it. Bill was also a licensed pilot. Bill would fly the plane for your father.
Bill said to my father, I'd like to have a plane where I can fly my family around when I choose to. If I'm your pilot for that plane, can I use it out of the airport right there in Florida when I want to? So that was the deal. So every now and then when my father would fly home from Florida, he would bring his Shepherd with him, and they would fly on my father's plane. And then whenever Bill wanted to use it personally, he could, but he was available to my father when my father wanted to fly.
Now, were your parents divorced at any time, or just separated?
So they separated, I'll say, in 84, and I think the divorce went through in 87 or 89.
You made mention earlier that you had left school, college.
Yeah.
What precipitated that?
So as I said earlier, my mother and father separated toward the end of my senior year. And I found while I was down at college my freshman year, I was calling my mom, who was now single and afraid, and at the home that we lived in, and I was calling my father somewhere else. And some part of that separation and the foundation of the family where I thought we were the Brady Bunch all these years just tore me up. So I was sad, I was depressed, and I was starting to feel really bad. And I asked my father at some point, okay, if I replace college and I come home and I join you as a business person. And my intention was to be there in between them to try to help the family come back together.
Right.
Yeah.
Was it talked about between you and your father that after college you would join him, or did he want you to go do something totally different?
I have to believe somewhere, somehow, there was always a desire for me to take over what he started, although it wasn't presented to me that way. As we'll see throughout this entire story, there's a lot of things that were necessarily unspoken, but I certainly wanted to follow in what he was doing. I had big eyes for my father forever, and all I wanted was his approval, and I wanted to be what he was and who he was and do what he did. When he spoke to me, it was, you can be anything you want, and I don't care if you want to be a truck driver, and I don't care if you were, but I didn't see it that way. He overschooled us. He put us in a private high school that went to school 6 days a week. And then when I got out of high school, he'd send me to summer camp. The first 4 hours of summer camp up in Long Lake Lodge in North Bridgeton, Maine, was a class from 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 11 to 12, and then it was camp for the rest of the day. And then I'd come back home and I'd be in, let's say, maybe advanced placement courses at Blair, and then I'd go through my next year, and then that summer I'd go, and my sister went this time, up to Long Lake Lodge, and we'd take school, and he overschooled us. When Blair would have snow days, and the day students didn't have to arrive. He'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go plow the parking lot. He'd show up in the driveway in the Suburban, beep the horn, and we were expected to come out, and he would drive us 45 minutes in a 8-inch, 12-inch, 2-foot snowstorm, and he delivers us to school and brought us home from school. So while my mom and dad were together, there was a importance placed on school and on going to college and on doing what we're going to do. So I don't know how to answer honestly what his expectation was of me once I came out of school. I did learn in therapy that after I came out of school, I said to the therapist one time, now that I think in hindsight, my father overschooled the heck out of my sister and I, because he and my mother didn't go to college, and my father overschooled the heck out of us. Why did he allow me to leave school and come join Byron Bus? And the therapist said to me, at the time, he needed a playmate. He wasn't with your mother anymore. He wasn't at the home anymore. He wasn't with the family. So his stuff had shifted, and his needs had shifted inside. So it was okay if his buddy came home and joined him in business.
Looking back, we touched on your father's childhood. Looking back at your childhood, do you look back on it fondly? Do you look back on it as tough? Was there love? Was your father the type of guy who would say, "I love you, son"?